tonight. First, I just want to start and acknowledge that this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and just want to pause to say that. Continue to work on your mental health like you do your physical. If I can get my page, there we go. Okay, so tonight we're gonna continue our May theme titled Can We Talk, which focuses on ways to improve communication using biblical principles. Give me 1 second, my window's open. Okay, sorry about that. So tonight we're going to continue our May theme titled Can We Talk, which focuses on ways to improve communication using biblical principles. So far, we've heard some great lessons from Tracy about allowing actions to speak more than words. And Jonathan covered strategies for answering gently and not matching harsh energy. Both lessons are posted on Coast to Coast YouTube page and Facebook. And I encourage you to go back if you missed them. They're really good, great lessons. For tonight, though, we're going to discuss another important component of communication highlighted in Proverbs 18:13, and that's listening. The title of the lesson is Can We Listen? And the lesson will focus on skills while communicating with friends, family, loved ones, coworkers, anyone for that matter. And for the purposes of this lesson, I want everyone to think from the perspective of the listener and examine what comes up about your own listening skills as we go through the lesson. I tried to make it very practical, and I also tried to make it a little bit shorter so we can have time for dialogue. There's been a lot of great dialogue happening this month. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. Is from Proverbs. Before I want to share some background on the book of Proverbs. First, the majority of the authorship is attributed to Solomon, who is known for being the wisest man. Proverbs consist of lessons that are in compact, memorable sayings that were passed from generation to generation by way of elders. And one of the purposes of the book is to help young people avoid pitfalls and to live prosperous lives. And there's also a recurring theme of wisdom and foolishness throughout the book. The definition of a proverb is a short, pithy saying in general use. And pithy means concise and forcefully expressive. And a short, pithy saying in general use stating a general truth or piece of advice. All right, so now let's read the text in a few different versions of the Bible. So Proverbs 18:13 in the NIV says, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. In the ESV, it's if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. In the NLT, it's spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. And then the Message makes it very plain. And it says, answering before listening is both stupid and rude. Okay, so now I want to define 4 words from the scripture that stood out to me. First, I just want to say that I've really grown to appreciate word studies because the original meaning can be lost in translation in addition to cultural context. And also, sometimes words have multiple meanings, and word studies can help you identify the appropriate definition to apply to the word in the context that it's being used. So the first word we'll define is answer, and it means speech, discourse, saying, or word. That's from Brown Diver Briggs lexicon. Second is listening. That means to hear intelligently, often with implication of attention, obedience, etc. And that's from Strong's definition. The third is folly, and that means silliness or foolish, according to Strong's. And then I looked at foolish in Webster, and it's defined as having or showing a lack of good judgment or discretion. And I just want to add a little bit of context to that, because that means that foolishness doesn't simply apply to someone lacking sense, judgment, or discernment. It also covers those who have it, but choose not to utilize it. And then the last word we'll define is shame. And that is a negative emotion caused by an awareness of wrongdoing, hurt ego, or guilt. And that's from Nielsen's Illustrated Bible Dictionary. So what is the text saying? As I previously mentioned, there are themes of wisdom and foolishness throughout the Proverbs. Sometimes wisdom and foolishness are applied. A notable example of wisdom personified can be found in Proverbs 31, 10 through 31, and the description of the virtuous woman. Other times, though, examples of wise and foolish characteristics are explicitly described. And that's the case for most of the verses in Proverbs 18. So going back to our text, a foolish act is being described. Again, the scripture says, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. The verse is about communication, and it centers on the listener's response or answer to the speaker. It outlines the making of a foolish answer, in essence. And the action of answering in and of itself is not foolish. I just want to make that point very clear. And I also want to make it clear that what is being said also isn't the source of foolishness. Instead, an answer is deemed foolish even before the listener opens their mouth if they have not taken time to listen to the speaker. So listening is the difference between foolishness and wisdom. Also just wanted to explore what additional context about wisdom and foolishness we can find in other verses of Proverbs 18. So foolishness is described in 2. It says, fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. And then wisdom is described in verse 15, and that says, the heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. So understanding and knowledge are discussed in both verses, but the distinction is that the wise seek understanding while the foolish not. Instead, the foolish prioritize their opinions over understanding. So going back to Proverbs 18:13, we can argue that answering before listening is foolish because understanding is either incomplete or it's completely absent. In addition to folly, the verse also says that the listener brings shame to themselves, and shame can enter when the listener's foolishness is revealed either through an uninformed response or if their attitude of answering before listening is communicated and disrupts the communication dynamics and the relationship dynamics. So in summary, listening is key. So for the rest of our discussion, let's just take a deeper look at listening. So I want to pause here and pose a question to the group. So please off mute if you can. If you can't, post in the chat. I just want to ask you all, is there a difference between hearing and listening? And as you answer, also explain how they are the same or different. And feel free to just come off mute.
Yeah, I'll answer that. There is a difference, and I believe the difference is actually located in the definition of listening that you described earlier, it says it's intelligent, which requires use of your brain. You can hear something, but yeah, it doesn't take effort or energy to hear something, but it does take effort and energy to listen. That's my opinion.
Nice. Anyone else?
Yes, you can hear the neighbors arguing across the street, but you don't, as far as the listening, you don't know what the context of that argument, how it started, with details of the argument. You don't know any of any of that information because you didn't really listen. You just heard the argument. So I think you got to go a little bit more in depth when it comes to listening rather than just hearing something.
Yep. Thank you.
I just want to mention in intent. I think that intent is also something that's important in terms of how, or rather, whether we listen or we. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, call came through. Whether we're listening or we are, or we're just hearing, right? Sometimes, different emotions can cloud our vision in terms, or our ability to say listen, and we may or may not even hear it because we have no choice over hearing. That's another thing I want to say. We have no choice over hearing. Our ears are. It's hard to close your ears.
Nice. Los?
Yeah, I was gonna say, for me, it's a matter of intention because I'm gonna tell myself, right? I can hear you talking, but when I ain't listening, I'm gonna be like, man, that's crazy, and I'm gonna say that a few times.
Yeah. Yep. Jacqueline and then Samantha.
I was gonna say, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I was gonna say, a child can hear, but it takes understanding to actually truly listen to what someone's saying. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Nice. Hey, Sam.
Hey, Los, you wow, bro. Sorry. I was going to say, from the perspective of a parent of a young child, you definitely have to really be listening for what your child is needing, and not just, you have to really be hearing what the child is trying to communicate. Sometimes when we're just listening and like maybe our child is acting out, we're like, oh, they just acting up, because they're bad or whatever, But if we're really listening or hearing them, I keep using them interchangeably. Anyway, but when we're really listening to them intuitively and intelligently, it's like, I wonder what's going on. Are they hungry? Are they, tired? Has it just been a long day? Do they miss me? Like, what's really going on,
Yeah. Yep, I know what you mean. Thank you, everyone. Great commentary and feedback. I'll just read a couple things that were added to the chat as well. Carlos quoted Alonzo from Training Day, and it says, yeah, you hear me, but you ain't listening. And then Dr. Tracy says, some people just be hearing sounds. Simone says, yeah, you hear noise. She said, you hear noise, you listen to information for understanding. And then Dr. Tracy said, listening brings attention to, which the definition of caring is bring attention to. Nice. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'm gonna keep moving. Okay, so while I was meditating on Proverbs 18:13, like Sam, I initially found myself using hearing and listening interchangeably. And it prompted me to explore the meaning, which revealed some important differences, many of which you all have already outlined. So right now I want to share some of the findings that I saw in an article from the Very Well Mind, and they distinguish hearing and listening this way. Oops. Okay, moving my mouse. Okay, so hearing is passive, involuntary, and a sensory process in which we perceive sound. And many of you said that, so thank you for helping me with my lesson. And it is also a physiological response that involves sound perception. It does not require focused attention. So an example similar to what Omar has already says, you know, you could be watching TV and you can still hear background noises like a dog barking, neighbors talking, or traffic, although your attention and focus is on the TV. Then alternatively, listening is an active, voluntary, and intentional process that involves making sense of the words and sounds you hear. It requires your attention. In turn, you may develop an emotional response to what you hear. It's reminding me of what Dr. Tracy said. And listening with the intent to understand is called active listening. And put a pin there because we're going to come back to it. So, for example, if you're listening to someone talk about their difficult day at work, your full attention will be focused on them. As they speak, you'll start to understand what their experience was like and the impact it had on them. And this will help you make thoughtful comments and ask relevant questions to further understand their experience after they're done speaking. So I do agree that there is a difference between listening and hearing. And when it comes to communication with others, hearing just isn't enough. Listening, and specifically active listening, must be exercised. So why? Why is that important? Because being listened to and understood is a fundamental human need. Can you recall a time when you were not being listened to and the accompanying emotions that arose? Maybe you felt alienated, devalued, lonely, unloved, misunderstood. When people don't feel listened to, it negatively impacts connection, and it can lead to tension and distance in relationships, make it difficult to resolve conflicts, and affect mental health and well-being. Alternatively, active listening and engaging with others can strengthen relationships because it fosters increased curiosity about other people's experiences. It also fosters compassion, empathy, and connection. So active listening is, let me change the slide. So active listening is a central component of communication. I used to think that I was an excellent listener, but learning about active listening helped me realize that while I was hearing, I lacked some components of active listening, and I just wasn't as good of a listener as I thought I was. And then as I prepared for this lesson, it made me want to assess my active listening skills. So I took a test which scores you into 3 categories. Those are good, okay, and poor. And my results were in the okay category, which means I exercise some components of active listening, but not all of them. And also that I had room to improve. So I just want to say here that this lesson was for me, and it's already been super helpful. And I've just been way more mindful about how I listen to others. For the remainder of the lesson, we will explore active listening skills, and I invite you to think about your own listening skills and consider areas where you are strong and how you got there, as well as areas that need improvement and how you can improve them. So now we're going to go through an active listening skills guide that I compiled from a few articles, as well as the responses to the last question I posted in the Coast to Coast Facebook group. So thank you to everybody who commented there. So the first is to be fully attentive and focused. Since active listening is a voluntary and intentional process, focus is necessary. It enables the listener to be fully engaged, which creates space for the speaker to openly express. And you can silently communicate attentiveness by doing the following. So the first thing is by limiting distractions. Limit external distractions by turning off the TV, putting your phone down, and refraining from multitasking while you are communicating with the speaker. Internal distractions are also a thing that may arise, and you can limit internal distractions by practicing mindfulness and being present. So if you find things coming up, try to be more present, and also avoid prioritizing your own thoughts and cares over the speaker's words. Try to avoid zoning out when the speaker repeats themselves or assuming you know what the speaker is trying to relay. Another way you can silently communicate attentiveness and focus is through your body language. And body language can speak just as loud as words, so be aware of what your body is saying. And you can do this by looking interested. And you can use body language to silently communicate attention and focus by turning towards the speaker, making eye contact, and nodding your head to signal that you're listening. Second, listen without making judgments or taking a position. The goal of communication is understanding. So set your perspective aside and try to gain understanding from the speaker's point of view. A wise person said you can't talk and listen at the same time. And I would add that you can't actively listen and formulate a response, make judgments or conclusions at the same time. Again, be mindful of your body language, monitor your facial expressions so they don't convey disagreement, irritation, or non-constructive emotions. Remember that active listening requires humility, curiosity, a non-judgmental attitude, and an open mind. Third, allow the speaker to finish their thoughts without interruption. Active listening requires patience and silence. Many, including myself, have been taught to relate to others by sharing similar experiences. You may feel the urge to interject and tell a story that's similar to what the speaker shared so that they know you hear them and that you relate to them. Or you may want to finish someone's sentence to help them express a thought. Or maybe during a conflict, you may be tempted to interrupt and express disagreement, but try to put your response on hold until you hear the speaker out. Or summarize what was said and check for understanding after the speakers finished talking. So the first thing you should say should be an acknowledgement of what the speaker has expressed. Repeating your own words, what you heard the other person say, to communicate that you're engaged and give the speaker an opportunity to clarify any misunderstandings. And fifth, ask clarifying questions. So if there's something you don't understand, ask open-ended questions so that the speaker can, give you more details and you can better understand what they're trying to say. And the last thing that I want to remind you all, and I want to remind myself, is that the listener is also responsible for ensuring that the speaker feels heard and that the speaker is understood. So now I just want to conclude with the verse that sums up this lesson. James 19 says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak." And what's not on the screen, but what it also says is that everyone should be slow to become angry. Active listening is a beneficial skill and an act of wisdom. Practicing listening is also an act of love, and it improves relationships. So I'll close by asking, can we commit to doing a better job of listening to each other? And then before I open up, I just want to leave you with some homework in the vein of Professor Leno. And I just want to invite you, if you're curious about your own listening skills, to take a listening skills assessment. It was helpful for me to see areas that I could improve in. I'll paste that in the one that I took in the chat, but I'm sure there are a bunch out there. And then I'll also post it to the Coast to Coast Facebook page once the video is posted. And then the other thing I want to invite you all to do is practice active listening skills while in conversation with a loved one and a colleague over the next few days. And the reason why I chose those two groups of people is because I think that we can be good listeners in certain settings, and we can have areas for improvement in others. Some people can be excellent listeners at work, where they maybe need to hear instructions to get the job done, but when they go home, they're multitasking and maybe not giving their full attention to loved ones, or it could be vice versa. So just want to invite you all to look at the areas that you're excelling in, and the areas that you can improve on, and practice those things in communication with others. Thank you. That's my lesson.